Join me tonight on Twitch at 11:30 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of Sunday Night Football, where we'll talk about everything and anything that happened in Week 3 of the NFL season. Plus, depending on how today's game goes, I'll rant a bit about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Timeouts are an extremely valuable currency in football, and I think that goes without saying. Each team gets 3 of them in a half, and especially in the second half, they have to know when to use them and when to keep them in their back pocket. Timeouts allow you to do so much. If you have one, you're allowed to challenge a call that you think was wrong and could change the complexion of the game. They allow you to stop the clock so that if you're behind, you have a chance to get the ball back sooner, or if you're tied and it's late, you can open up your playbook more and actually use the middle of the field. They allow you to prevent backing up 5 yards for a delay of game penalty, and those yards can be critical depending on the down and distance. Or if you see something that you don't like you only have 10 on the field, or the other team lines up in a formation that you weren't prepared for, and you don't have the appropriate personnel out there, it allows you to stop the game and get it fixed, and make the necessary adjustments. Long story short, timeouts are really useful for a variety of reasons, and are extremely important, and the last thing you want to do is just call them willy-nilly without a care in the world. There's a reason why most teams have all of their timeouts entering the fourth quarter, and there's a reason why with 5 minutes left in the game, most teams have 2 or 3 timeouts in their back pocket. There's a reason why that's the case, and not, well, whatever the heck the Broncos did in 2006. Because in a 2006 game against the San Francisco 49ers, the Broncos decided that it would be a good idea to burn all of their timeouts on one drive in the third quarter. Seriously, we weren't even 13 minutes into the second half, and somehow, the Broncos were all out of timeouts due to some absolutely incompetent coaching on the part of Mike Shanahan. And this is the story behind, quite possibly, with apologies to Nathaniel Hackett, the worst timeout management in the over 60-year history of the Denver Broncos franchise. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, and the absolutely god-awful timeout mismanagement that never should have happened in the first place, we need some context to understand the importance of this game, as well as how the game was going beforehand, because there was something big that happened before the sequence that led to the drama at hand. It's December 31st, 2006. It's week 17 of the NFL season, and to cap off the year, we've got a big interconference game on our hands between the San Francisco 49ers and the Denver Broncos over in Colorado at Invesco Field at Mile High. For the 49ers, this game means absolutely nothing. They enter this game with a 6-9 record, the second worst point differential in the conference, and having been eliminated from the playoff picture after choking down the stretch. We're following a 5-5 start, and looking like they might have a shot to win a super weak NFC West, they drop 4 out of 5. But for the Broncos, oh man, this game meant everything. And it's not just because they had a fan come all the way from New Zealand specifically for this game, and you don't want to disappoint him. This was the biggest game of the entire week, and one of the biggest games of the entire season from an implication standpoint. It was simple, especially after the Chiefs won at 1 o'clock against the Jaguars. If the Broncos won this game, they would be in the playoffs as a wild card with a 10-6 record. If they lost this game, then they would be out, and Kansas City would be in. For the Broncos, who started the season 7-2, I don't think anyone expected that it would take a Week 17 win in order to clinch a playoff spot, but here we were. Still, this shouldn't be a problem for the Broncos, right? I mean, they're at home, they're playing a San Francisco team that has absolutely nothing to play for, and they're favored by 10 points. This should be a cakewalk if all goes according to plan. And the good news for the Broncos was that, early on, things were looking great for Denver, as they looked to make the playoffs for the 4th straight season. With 2 minutes left in the first half, the Broncos were on cruise control, as following 2 field goals made by the always reliable Jason Elam and a pick 6 by Champ Bailey, where he took an Alex Smith pass 70 yards to the house the other way, the Broncos were up 13-0 and were absolutely dominating. Even at halftime, even though the Niners finally got on the scoreboard late following a 46-yard field goal by Joe Nedney, the Broncos were still up 13-3. Denver's defense was playing lights out, forcing 4 3-and-outs in the first half alone, and holding the Niners to just 1 first down in the first 27 minutes. The Broncos were leading the yardage battle 168-90, nearly doubling up on San Francisco's total yardage, and everything seemed to be going their way. That was the good news. The bad news, however, came on this play right here, which plays a critical part in our story. It's the second quarter, and rookie quarterback Jay Cutler gets thrown to the ground hard by Anthony Adams, getting sacked for a loss of 10. Now the play didn't count, as the Niners were called for illegal contact, with a penalty giving the Broncos a first down. However, that still didn't negate the effects of the hit that Cutler took, because after this, he was banged up pretty badly, to the point where he immediately went to the sideline to receive treatment. Not only was Cutler out for the next play, but he was out for the rest of the drive, and the drive after that, and the drive after that. Cutler was out for the entire second quarter of action after that play, with veteran backup quarterback Jake Plummer, who started the first 11 games of the season, being called into action. As a side note, if you want to learn more about Jake Plummer and the career that he had with the Broncos, which was definitely up and down to say the least, click the card in the upper right corner. Now, if this was 2005 Jake Plummer that we were talking about, as in the man who made it to the Pro Bowl, led the Broncos to a 13-3 record, and finished with the 7th highest passer rating in all of football, then no problem. But this was 2006 Jake Plummer that we were talking about, as in a man who was very clearly on his last legs, and had thrown more interceptions and touchdowns, putting up in just about every category the worst numbers of his career with the Broncos. And when Plummer was in the game, it was absolutely brutal, to the point where you wondered if Plummer had even played the quarterback position before, and wondered how this was the man who 1 year ago was one of the best quarterbacks in football and was only a game away from the Super Bowl. During the second quarter, when Plummer was called on in relief, he went 0 for 2 while taking a sack and throwing an interception deep down the field to Walt Harris that was essentially a routine fly ball to center field. Oh, and he took a false start. A quarterback taking a false start penalty is something that you don't see every day. This meant that Plummer finished the second quarter with a passer rating of 0.0. The only reason it wasn't worse is because it literally cannot go any lower than that. Sure, the Broncos were up 13-3 at the half, but it wasn't going to last if Plummer kept playing like this. They needed to get Jay Cutler back out there. Sure, he was clearly injured and concussed and wasn't in the right state of mind. Cutler himself said after the game, "I was a little dinged up. My head was swimming a little bit." One reporter described him as looking woozy, and his teammate, tight end Tony Scheffler, said on Cutler, "You could see it in his eyes. He wasn't all there." Remember, this is 2006 that we're talking about, which was a different era. We were still a few years away from all the concussion protocol being a thing. You didn't see guys get tested the way that they are today. You didn't see players being told that they couldn't go back out there. You had the mantra of if it wasn't a physical injury, you fought through it, and you tried to shake it off. Even though we know today that this mindset is so wrong and so dangerous. And Cutler wanted to get back out there. And with the Broncos struggling so badly under Plummer, they figured that a clearly woozy and clearly concussed rookie quarterback gave them a better chance to win this game and clinch a playoff spot than Jake Plummer did. Sure, Cutler was 0 for 2 on his first drive back, with one of those throws being a pick six on an absolutely terrible pass that was picked off, once again, by Walt Harris. And sure, he clearly still did not look good, with Chris Berman even commenting in the highlights package that day on SportsCenter that he wasn't 100%. But the coaching staff was not going to take him out. No way were they going back to Plummer, especially now that they were trailing. This was Cutler's game to play. And with the Broncos now down 17-13 in the third quarter, trailing for the first time all day, they needed a big drive to swing the momentum back in their favor. What followed was, in many ways, inevitable, considering Cutler's mental state. What followed was just about unprecedented. Because the Broncos, without challenging any plays and losing timeouts in that manner, proceeded to burn all 3 of their timeouts in the third quarter on one drive within 4 plays of each other. After a nice kickoff return by Quincy Morgan to get the Broncos to midfield, and 2 short passes by Jay Cutler to get the Broncos right by the red zone, they've got the ball at the 24-yard line. It's 1st and 15 following a false start penalty on Tatum Bell, and on this play, Cutler takes an end zone shot to Tony Scheffler, which falls incomplete. Keep in mind there is nothing noteworthy about this play. Cutler doesn't take a hit or anything like that, as he stays perfectly upright the whole time. But after the play, you see him looking over the sideline for a really long period of time. And after looking at the sideline, with the play clock winding down, and with Cutler not even having entered the huddle yet, the Broncos burn their first timeout of the half. Alright, it stinks having to burn a timeout midway through the third quarter, but it happens. I've seen worse. Heck, I saw a 2013 game between the Titans and the Jaguars where the opening kickoff of the second half was a touchback, and Chad Henne decided to burn a timeout with 15 minutes left in the third quarter. Point is, it happens, as much as they stink and as much as you want to avoid them. Third quarter timeouts happen. The good news for the Broncos is that they bounce back following the timeout, as Cutler throws 2 passes in a row to Rod Smith, both of which went for 10 yards, and with the second one resulting in a first down to get the Broncos down to the 4-yard line of San Francisco, now in prime position to retake the lead. But watch the broadcast footage of that third down catch. The replay of the catch is done. They show a shot of Rod Smith adjusting his equipment in the huddle, and yet, Jay Cutler hadn't even entered the huddle yet. He spent that whole time talking with his coaches on the sideline, trying to get the play in and get the signals right. Usually, when you see a replay of a previous play, and then you see a shot of the player that made the play, the next shot is either the team breaking the huddle or the team already at the line. Usually, in that situation, by the time Fox would cut back to a shot of Rod Smith, Smith would be assuming his position on the line of scrimmage. It wouldn't be with the quarterback not even being in the huddle yet. But for whatever reason, Cutler just couldn't get the plays down and the signals down. I think today, we know why that's the case, seeing as the man was concussed, even though the Broncos refused to diagnose it as that at the time, saying that it was a head injury. But it forces the Broncos to burn their second timeout. Not ideal at all. But hey, you've got one left. Gotta save it for the right time and be smart about how you use it, but it's there if you need it. The following 2 plays do not go well for Denver at all, as following a 1-yard loss by Mike Bell and a sack, where Cutler gets sacked thanks to some pressure from Mark Roman, the Broncos are facing 3rd and goal at the 14-yard line, having moved back 10 yards from their original line of scrimmage. And after taking that shot, and after the broadcast showing not 1, but 2 replays of the sack, meaning that a good portion of the play clock had been used up by this point, the Broncos still have not left the huddle. When they break the huddle, Cutler looks at the play clock, realizes that there's no time left, and burns that 3rd and final timeout, prompting boos from the crowd. It got to a point where even the announcers were openly questioning whether Cutler was in the right headspace, whether the Broncos were lying about how injured he truly was, and whether he should even be in the game. Take a listen.
They've called 3 timeouts in 2.5 minutes on this drive. Might that be an after effect of the head injury that he's a little confused right now?
I don't think he's all there. I really don't. I mean, I thought the opening drive when he threw the pick.
Just like that, the Broncos, in the span of 2 minutes, burned all of their timeouts on one drive in the third quarter. I mean, that's embarrassing no matter how you want to look at it. It's incredibly rare for a team to burn all 3 of their second half timeouts in the third quarter, let alone on one drive, let alone on a drive where you don't even challenge a single play. If you had one instance of the play clock winding down and you call a timeout to avoid the delay of game, and then you had 2 instances on the drive of super close plays that you thought should be challenged and you lost those, then that would be one thing. But for this to happen? To burn 3 timeouts in such quick succession this early on? Yeah, that's not good. And those timeouts could have come in handy, as with the score tied at 23 apiece with 90 seconds left in the fourth quarter, the 49ers went 3 and out. Now, if the Broncos had their timeouts, maybe they could use them, get it back with a minute left, and drive down the field to win it in regulation. Instead, the clock ran all the way down to 1 second, giving Denver no time to win it in 60 minutes. San Francisco then won the game in overtime. And after the game, Mike Shanahan took responsibility for the timeout fiasco, saying, "I don't blame it on the quarterback. I blame it on me. I have to get it in there a little quicker." I mean, I don't think getting the play calls in too slowly was the problem here. I think the problem was that you had a clearly concussed quarterback who had no business being out there, that clearly couldn't think straight, and had testimony after the game from players and even himself that he couldn't think right. You're taking responsibility for a completely different problem that doesn't exist. That's like if you're late to a function and you say that you blame yourself for not driving faster, even though we know the real problem is that you didn't leave early enough. And it might have cost the Broncos their entire season in the process. So for any coaches watching this, here's a word of advice. Don't burn all 3 of your timeouts on one drive in the third quarter. It's going to backfire. Trust me. You will need those timeouts for later in the game, as it will play an impact. And if you have a quarterback who is clearly concussed and can't get the plays down in time, then maybe it's not a good idea to play that quarterback. Just a thought. Because on New Year's Eve in 2006, the person in charge of dropping the ball at Times Square wasn't the biggest instance of someone dropping the ball that night. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.